Chicago area to become the president and CEO of the Chicago-based National Safety Council. And Deborah Hersman joins us now. Deborah Hersman, welcome to Chicago Tonight. Welcome to the Chicago area.
Thank you.
First of all, how did you get into the accident investigation business in the first place?
You know, I think probably like most things in life, it wasn't something I planned when I was young, but it was as paths diverged, one thing led to another, and it really started with an internship on Capitol Hill. The office that called me and offered me the summer internship, that member was a senior member of the Transportation Committee, and it all went from there.
But as I look at your personal background, it seems like some factors, some things about your past sort of make sense. I mean, your dad was a military pilot, as I understand it. You have a background in piloting. I mean, you explore that. You ride a motorcycle, or you've ridden a motorcycle in the past. So transportation and machines, part of your background.
I think it probably is in my blood. I was born at Edwards Air Force Base, where my dad was a test pilot, and I grew up as the daughter of a fighter pilot all around the world. I was in 4 different high schools in 4 different countries, and it was really kind of neat to be an Air Force brat. And I soloed in a Piper Tomahawk before I got my driver's license.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
But you know, but life is strange, and you know, it leads us in different directions. I thought that I would go on a different path instead of following my father's footsteps into aviation, and I went and worked on Capitol Hill for 12 years, and then I ended up back in aviation. So
I see. Well, listen, let's talk about your work at the NTSB, because it strikes me that first of all, when there's an accident, as a former street reporter, one of the things we always waited for was somebody from your former agency to tell us what happened. What do you do when you get to an accident site? Because it strikes me as a potentially chaotic scene where people don't know what the big picture is. How do you approach an accident scene?
Well, you know, the really great thing about working for the NTSB is we did have a process for that. It was really making order out of a very chaotic situation. And a lot of times things are chaotic on the ground because people have never experienced something like that before. A big major aviation accident where dozens or even hundreds of people might be affected. The NTSB can come in and say, we've done this before. We know how to organize it. We know how to set it up. And we have a tried and true process. And it really does help bring some confidence to the local community and some order to the situation. And we very methodically go through each step of our investigative process. And the great thing about the NTSB, as you mentioned, as a reporter, is that we're very transparent. And that's not something people always see.
Well, you know, that's interesting you mentioned that, because the NTSB is a tiny agency by federal standards, relatively small budget of $90 million, 400 employees, and yet the NTSB has an influence beyond its size. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think definitely the NTSB is a very small but mighty agency, really had a big megaphone when it came to accidents. And I think in a lot of respects that has to do because the press was interested in what happened in the aftermath of an accident. That gave the board a platform, and in many cases we were a truth teller. And in federal government there's a lot of challenges. You know, there's a lot of different pressures on other people. But at the NTSB, we were created as an independent agency. We didn't answer to cabinet officials. We were protected. And I would say absolutely in the Obama administration, they respected that independence. We were allowed to say whatever we wanted to say. We were allowed to issue the recommendations that we wanted to issue. Sometimes they weren't popular, like banning cell phones for drivers behind the wheel. Sometimes they were expensive. It might cost industry a lot of money to do some of the things that we asked, but we always had that independence, and people respected it.
One of the things I was surprised to learn in getting ready for this interview is that your recommendations are not binding. How influential are they if they are not binding? Because another thing I learned is how often you meet resistance to some of your recommendations, perhaps for cost or political reasons or whatever. But how about that? The fact that your recommendations are simply that.
That's right. So we didn't have any regulatory power. We couldn't force people to do things. And we actually didn't have any money to incentivize people, to give them grants to make them do it. And so we really had to go on the basis of the information that we put forward. And the strength of our recommendations was based on how credible they were. About 80% of our recommendations over the course of history since '67 at the NTSB, we issued almost 14,000 recommendations, and over 80% were accepted in a favorable way. And that's good, because usually that meant that people agreed with us and they did what we asked, or some alternative. The 20% that didn't get implemented, those were the things that were probably controversial, were very expensive, or difficult to implement. And so those are the things that ended up on our most wanted list, our top 10 of things that we wanted to get done.
You told our producer that the NTSB has been pushing for something called positive train control, something that might have been of relevance to the CTA train crash at O'Hare recently. What is positive train control?
Well, you know, positive train control might sound like something complicated, but it actually has been around for a long time.
And here we're seeing video of the actual crash of the CTA train Blue Line. But you were saying?
And we actually made recommendations about a forerunner of positive train control back to the 1970s. It was called positive train separation. But really, it's very straightforward technology. And Phil, you and I probably have more technology in our pockets with our iPhones than many locomotives did with respect to GPS positioning and how to kind of detect where you were in relation to other things. Trains are operating on tracks, very well-defined spaces and locations, and positive train control is just about keeping that separation between the trains so that they don't have a collision or that they don't run over their own employees when a area is protected. That is really what positive train control is about, is to keep those collisions from happening. When human beings fail...
Is that a fancy way of saying automatic brakes, a system that would automatically stop a train?
That's right. That's right. It's pretty straightforward, but there's been a lot of resistance over the years. It is expensive. There's a lot of interoperability issues between different railroads, and certainly in Chicago, you have railroads coming here, freight, passenger, U.S. railroads, Canadian railroads. I mean, this really is the crossroads of the country.
You traveled to the scene of more than 20 accident investigations. Are there any that particularly stand out for you?
You know, that's asking me to pick my favorite amongst my children. You know, they all stand out. They all affect you. And I think whenever you go to visit an accident scene, there are things that stay with you. And whether 5 people are killed or 500 people are killed, those are tragedies. All of them are tragedies for the families who lost loved ones. But
which might have been the most high-profile incident that you personally were involved with?
So the most high-profile was definitely Asiana. That accident occurred at San Francisco International Airport last July. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary, and I'm not sure if it's because it was an international incident, because it was the first fatal accident in 4 years in the United States, or just because media is different now with respect to the 24/7 news cycle, social media, you know, all of the information that's out there. But that one definitely garnered a lot of attention, even though only 3 people were killed.
You know, it really did get a lot of attention, and, you know, so much of it had to do with just well, I mean, there was that unfortunate, bogus news announcement afterwards and so forth. But what are you most proud of your tenure at the NTSB?
Well, I would say there's a lot of things I'm proud of, but probably the most important one was raising the accountability of the organization to produce quality, timely reports, and secondly, probably raising the profile of an agency to make sure that Americans understood that the work that we did affected them every day, whether it was behind the wheel of a car, riding on a train on CTA, or flying in an airplane from O'Hare.
The NTSB has weighed in on the certification process for the batteries on the Boeing Dreamliner. Would you fly one?
I would.
You would fly a Dreamliner, notwithstanding some of the reservations that the NTSB has expressed.
I have. There have been a lot of steps to mitigate some of the concerns that existed. But again, it shows us some of our vulnerabilities in a transportation system where everything has to work exactly as designed every time.
So the National Safety Council, very briefly remind us what it does and tell us why you took the job.
Well, the National Safety Council is an organization that is focused on my mission, my passion in life, which is saving lives. And so it was a really incredible fit for me to be able to focus not just on safety and transportation, but also come to the National Safety Council and focus on safety in the workplace and in our homes.